Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Mean Streets here at FTN. Chris Meaney hanging out with you. I wanted to talk about the NFL schedule. It was released this week. I know I haven't done a lot of Mean Streets episodes lately, but now that the schedule is out, we can start diving into the NFL season. So we'll have a lot more Mean Streets episodes here at FTN over the next little bit. So, friendly reminder. Myself and Dane Martinez are live at SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio, channel 87, FTN Fantasy Show, 4 days a week. We will be live Monday at 2 Eastern, but pretty much Tuesday through Friday at 2 Eastern, talking all things sports, NFL, NHL, NBA as well. So if you do have a subscription over at SiriusXM Fantasy Sports, you can catch us over there, channel 87, from 2 to 3 o'clock. So enough about that. Let's get into the NFL schedule. I really, on this show today, wanted to talk about, it's not too early to look at week one. Why not? We got some lines. You can look at week one. We can just talk about the schedule in general, go over some of the primetime games, Thursday night, Sunday night, Monday night, some fun little revenge spots. Also want to take a look at the weeks that matter the most in fantasy playoffs from week 15 to 17. And of course, so much will change. And there are a couple teams that have some very tough schedules. I think it's a mistake to just cross off teams on your list when you're drafting in fantasy because they have a tough schedule. But there are certainly a couple teams, Miami and Pittsburgh, that have very tough schedules to finish the season. And it's enough for me to kind of turn my attention another way. We'll get into those teams in just a little bit. So primetime games, international games, hardest and easiest schedules to start the season, to finish the season, using opposing teams' win totals according to Vegas. A shout out to Mike Randall, who put together some great stuff. We have some short videos on our YouTube page as well, and our Twitter account, FTN Fantasy, has been popping out some great content. So shout out to Mike Randall. Shout out to Fox for putting together some boards for me as well. What should we do first? Before we get into week one, let's take a look at how the season's going to start for certain teams. Let's go here with the easiest schedule. So I just ripped this off of our Twitter account. So if you're watching live, we'll have some fun with it. Bats. If you're hanging out with us on iTunes and Spotify, well, I'm going to read this off for you. The easiest schedule from week 1 to week 5. Number 1, the New York Jets. Number 2, the San Francisco 49ers. Those two teams are actually going to get it on week 1. And they are 2 of 3 teams that have 6 primetime games. Yes, we're doing this again with the New York Jets. They have 6 primetime games. Aaron Rodgers was supposed to get a lot of primetime action last year, and he suffered an injury the first couple plays in. They're giving him another go. The Jets, number 1, the Niners, number 2, the Seahawks, number 3, the Dolphins, number 4, and the Bears, number 5. It's good news for Miami to start easy because things get very difficult for them, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. As for the Jets, as I mentioned, they open up against San Francisco. Week 1, they open up against the 49ers at San Fran. Week 2, at Tennessee against the Titans. Then a couple layups at home against New England, and then at home against Denver, and then at home against Minnesota. Tough one to start, but 4 winnable games to follow. And last year, their schedule was very tough to start. San Francisco, of course, at home against the Jets. And then that is the Monday Night Football game. Then we have at Minnesota, at the Rams. So, not super easy for San Fran to start. Their schedule is actually pretty tough at the end of the season. They're the only team to face 4 teams coming off a bye, which is tough in itself, of course. And there's some tough teams there in the later part of their season. But they have the Jets, they have the Vikings, they have the Rams. Then it gets a little bit easier with New England and Arizona. By the way, for Chicago, the 5th easiest schedule to start for Caleb Williams opens up at home against the Titans, then into Houston to take on CJ Stroud. And I believe that's a Sunday Night Football game. That one should be fun. And then continuing on the road against the Colts, Anthony Richardson in a dome, then at home against the Rams, and then at home against Carolina. So not a daunting start for Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears as well. Speaking of, we'll switch over. We'll go hardest. We'll sit with the start of the season. So again, for the iTunes listeners, hardest schedule from weeks 1 to 5. This is using opposing teams' win totals according to Vegas. I don't think much is going to change in the first 5 weeks. We'll get into what could change in the second half. We've seen teams in the second half of their season, defenses that you don't expect, you didn't expect really to be good. They took off in the second half. Chicago was one of those teams. Hardest schedule to start week 1 to week 5. Baltimore Ravens number 1, Kansas City Chiefs number 2, the Los Angeles Rams number 3, the Arizona Cardinals number 4, and the Minnesota Vikings number 5. Much like San Fran and New York with the Jets, with the easiest schedule facing each other to start the season, Baltimore and Kansas City facing each other to open up the NFL season. That's right. We're going to get underway at Arrowhead, Thursday Night Football, Kansas City, the two-time defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs at home against the Baltimore Ravens, which was a rematch of the AFC Conference Championship game where not much happened for the Baltimore Ravens. So, of course, that game in KC, but after that for Baltimore, they're at home against the Raiders, which is an easy game for them, let's be honest. They should be able to take care of the Raiders. Then in Dallas to take on the Cowboys. After that, at home against the Bills. And then week 5 in Cincinnati against the Bengals. So a very tough start for the Baltimore Ravens. Let's get into the later part of the season, week 13 to 17. I included some teams week 18 as well because it matters for them from an overall NFL standpoint. Of course, not for fantasy. You could use this information for your best ball drafts, which, by the way, we have an underdog best ball kit over at ftnfantasy.com. I wrote about a few of my favorite targets at each position. We'll continue to do some streams here on Mean Streets, and we did a couple already, myself and Mike Randall, before the buys. Now we have the buys, so it's better to draft knowing which teams are going to have those buys. But I included week 13 as well, and I know Randall did, just because week 13, week 14, very important weeks to punch yourself a ticket into the dance. And of course, with best ball, certainly the best ball mania 5, everything starts to get underway week 15, 14, 15, 16, get the championship week into week 17. So let's take a look at the easiest. We'll start there. Week 13 to 17, we have the Colts at number 1, the Cardinals at number 2, the Commanders at number 3, the Atlanta Falcons at 4, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 5. And if you remember from last year, the Saints, the Bucs, the Falcons, I mean, they're all playing each other. It's a brutal division. So that's part of why you have the easiest schedule to wrap things up. For a couple opponents over those games, the Colts have the Pats to start week 13. Then they're on the bye, which is tricky. You don't really want your players on a bye the week before things get going in the playoffs, but week 14 is the bye. Week 15 would be the quarters, of course, for best ball and for your fantasy football playoffs. Most likely it should be, unless you're playing in shallower leagues. But remember, week 18 should not be your championship week. But New England, tough defense, not super easy, but a winnable game certainly for the Colts. Then the bye, then at Denver. We'll see what that defense looks like this season, but also Mile High, not the easiest place to play. But then they finish off with the Titans at home, and then they're in New York or Jersey, MetLife, to take on the Giants. Arizona has at Minnesota, home to Seattle, home to New England, at Carolina, and at the Rams. So, Minnesota's defense, you're checking some boxes there. You don't have to go into Seattle to play the Seahawks, which is good for Arizona. Kyler being at home, but it is a divisional game. New England, again, still a tough defense, but you got that game against Carolina mixed in there as well. By the way, we're pretty competitive down the stretch of last season. Number 3 for Washington. Really like the schedule for the Commanders. Besides the fact with the bye, you got the Titans week 13 at home, then the bye, but then in a dome against New Orleans, then at home against the Eagles. Don't have to go on the road to play Philadelphia, and then at home against Atlanta. As for Atlanta, you got home to the Chargers week 13, in Minnesota week 14, in a dome, in Las Vegas week 15, home to the Giants week 16, and then at Washington week 17, and then week 18 is at home to Carolina. So a really nice stretch of games for Atlanta. I'm sure the matchup against Minnesota may have something on the line in terms of wild card potentially there, but a winnable game against the Raiders, the Giants, the Commanders, and Carolina for the Falcons to finish strong. And then Tampa Bay, for me, looking at this this schedule here is the easiest to wrap it up. I would say that Tampa has the quote unquote easiest path to wrap up the season. They get Carolina week 13 in Carolina. Week 14, they're home to the Raiders. Week 15, they're in LA to take on the Chargers. week 16 at Dallas to take on the Cowboys, but then they get Carolina again week 17. So 2 games against Carolina, which are pretty good matchups, of course, for Baker Mayfield. Although, if you remember last year, Carolina needing a W, I think it was like week 17 against the Panthers. They weren't really doing a whole lot on offense. I think they won that game by field goals, but they have the Panthers twice and then a couple dome games in there against the Chargers and against the Cowboys. Then you're in your own building as well against the Raiders. So pretty easy schedule towards the end. What does this mean from a fantasy standpoint as we just flash up these teams again? Anthony Richardson's really a quarterback that I like. Of course, you're not going to have him week 14 for the bye, but you got to get to, those weeks. You know what I mean? Like some of these teams that I'm rattling off, hey, who knows? Carolina's defense, maybe they take, the NFL by surprise in the second half and they're a good run stopping defense. I don't expect them to be, but things can change and they will change from now or week 1 up until week 13 and week 17. Arizona's schedule, pretty easy to start, pretty easy to finish. So I like some of the matchups that they have. Of course, they're in Buffalo week 1, which is tough, but some winnable games for them and fantasy friendly matchups as well against the Vikings and against Carolina. As for the hardest schedule, this is probably the biggest takeaway I have from looking at the NFL schedule is I don't think I've ever seen a finish as daunting as what the Steelers are going to have to go through here. You remember last year when we were talking about the Philadelphia Eagles and that stretch that may have crushed them, right? They had Dallas and San Fran and KC and Dallas again into Seattle, and then they looked awful against the Giants and the Cardinals. I think that stretch actually broke them as a squad, even though they won a couple of those games, but I think they lucked into a couple. The Steelers have the toughest schedule from week 13 to week 17. The Texans, number 2, the Lions, number 3, the Dolphins, number 4. We'll get into them in a second. And then the Niners the Niners at number 5. I think I addressed them up at the top as well. So let's just start here with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I'm actually going to bring up their entire schedule. We're going to do some team previews here on Mean Streets where we dive into the schedules and our favorite sleepers and busts and targets from those teams from a fantasy football perspective. It's just May 17th here. Happy Friday. Appreciate you guys taking the time to hang out with me. We're having a time here, aren't we? Okay, so the Steelers, get this. I actually want to go before week 13. I want to start here at week 11. So week 11, actually their season starts. Let's just put it all in a nutshell here. Their season starts on the road in Atlanta, on the road against Denver. So 2 road games to start. And then, fun little revenge game potentially there for Russ if he is the starter in Denver week 2. Then at home against the Chargers, they go to the Colts in week 4. They play Dallas week 5. They have a couple winnable games here. The Raiders week 6 at Las Vegas. Tough one at home against the Jets, but then they get the Giants right after. So the 2 New York teams there, and then Washington week 10 after their bye week 9. This is where it gets crazy. And Mike Tomlin, by the way, holds the record for the most consecutive non-losing seasons to begin a coaching career with 17. He's had 3 8-8 seasons. He was 10-7 last year, came on strong towards the end of the season with piss poor play at the quarterback position. Phenomenal coach. Defense is going to be good. Everything revolves around Watt, especially. And when he's not on the field, they struggle. Still think they need something offensively outside of the quarterback position. George Pickens, I know they drafted Roman Wilson. I'm getting sidetracked. 9-8 in 2022. From week 11 on, listen to this schedule. Home to Baltimore, at Cleveland, at Cincy, home to Cleveland, at Philadelphia, at Baltimore, home to KC, home to Cincinnati. It doesn't get any tougher than that. Of course, the division, I think the AFC North is not only the toughest division, best division in football. That's my opinion. Maybe in sports. Like, seriously, the Ravens, the Bengals, Joe Burrow got hurt last year. Else Bengals are back in the playoffs, most likely. Cleveland's in the dance. Baltimore, Cleveland, and Cincinnati. Those 3 teams, along with Pittsburgh, of course, some very good teams inside the division. So you got to go division Baltimore, at Cleveland division, at Cincy division. Then you're back home to face Cleveland week 14. Then you got 2 games back-to-back on the road in Philly, in Baltimore. That Baltimore game is on a Saturday, so a little bit of a short turnaround. Then they get a Christmas game on Wednesday. Yes, we are going to see football on Wednesday this year. 2 games, in fact, Christmas Day. got to be subbed to Netflix, apparently. Home to KC and then home to Cincinnati. That is absolute crazy finish. And I think just the way it starts, of course, home to Baltimore, at Cleveland, at Cincy, home to Cleveland. I mean, that's a really tough stretch of 4 divisional games in a row, and then the 2 in a row on the road. But I think it really gets tough where you got to go to Philly December 15th, and then the Saturday you play Baltimore, and then you turn around and you have to play on a Wednesday against the Kansas City Chiefs, and then you wrap up your season hoping you have something to play for against the Bengals. So extremely tough there for Pittsburgh. As for Houston, not as daunting. Got at Jacksonville, got a bye, home to Miami, at KC, then home to Baltimore. So the stretch there of KC, Baltimore is tough. Of course, Miami's got a high win total as well, but that would be a winnable game for them at home. Detroit has home to Chicago, home to Green Bay, home to Buffalo. So 3 games in a row at home, but tough opponents. I think Chicago's going to hang with some teams this season. They won 7 games last year. They've improved. And then, of course, in Green Bay and in Buffalo, and then at Chicago, so you get the Bears again, and then at San Fran. That is a really tough finish for Detroit as well. How about this for Miami? And we know about Tua, right? And the cold weather. They go to Lambeau, week 13 at Green Bay. Then they're home to the Jets at home, but still a tough opponent. Then at Houston in a dome, get outside of the cold, but a tough opponent. At home, get out of the cold, but a tough opponent in San Fran coming to town. And then they got to go at Cleveland and at the Jets week 18. That's 3 cold weather cities in Green Bay, Cleveland, and the Jets. And then you have to go on the road and play the Texans, and you welcome the Jets and you welcome the Niners. Friendly reminder, the Tua is 6-13 in temperatures under 70 degrees. He's 0-7 when temperatures peak at 45 degrees or lower, 55% completion rate over that span, and he's 0-4 in games under 40 degrees. Pretty sure Lambeau is going to be chilly, and I know Cleveland's going to be chilly. I've been there a few times. Meaney lot is a good time, but First Energy Stadium can be absolutely just chilly. Pins and needles. You're going to have a couple cold ones. Miami fans, if you are traveling to Cleveland for what would be week 17, that's enough for me, honestly, to cross Tua off my list in a super flex league. It really is. Like, and I don't know if that is bad advice. I could probably hear a couple analysts in my head saying that's bad advice. You should probably not do that. You take what drafts give you. If they fall and you think the value is there, you also got to get to week 17. And we know Tua has top 10 upside, right, at the position. I don't think Odell Beckham Jr. is going to offer a whole lot. We haven't seen a wide receiver 3 step up in that offense in a couple of years, but Jalen Waddle's due for a bounce back. Tyreek is a cheat code. Jonnu Smith maybe catching balls for a tight end this year, that they really haven't had a lot of production at that position over the past couple of years. And Mike McDaniel's got himself a new shiny toy in Jalen Wright, who can run. So they got some dudes out of the backfield, but I mean, I'm not going to be interested in, I can already tell right now where I'm going to rank Tua at Lambeau if it's chilly, or at home against the Jets defense, or even on the road against the Texans defense. Then you got the San Francisco 49ers defense. Then in your championship week, are you going to want to start Tua semifinals, San Fran, or championship at Cleveland? You're not. I know you got to get to the dance, but no effect on Tyreek, and I still like Waddle. I'm just I don't think I'm going to be in on 2. I know that I don't want to be my quarterback in a single quarterback league, and Superflex is enough to cross off the list there. So take a look at the hardest and the easiest ones, to finish and to start the season. I got some week 15, week 17 stuff here I wanted to show you guys as well, but let's take a look at actually a couple things first. We just quickly say, I got the primetime games here. Just, I'm sure people saw this on social media, but we're just diving into everything NFL schedule related here on this episode. So 3 teams with 6 primetime games: the Jets, the Niners, the Cowboys. No surprise. We're doing this again with Rodgers, though. 5 for teams that have 5 games a lot: KC, Buffalo, Green Bay. Nice to see Love, getting some attention. They were a great offense last year. Detroit, Cincy, Baltimore, Philly, Miami, and the Rams. All good offenses. Love to see it. 4 teams, a few teams here with 4 primetime games. You have the Texans, the Steelers, the Bucks, Seattle, Atlanta, and Cleveland. The Giants, the Bears, the Chargers, and the Saints have 3 primetime games, so you get 3 there for Caleb Williams. There's 5 teams with 2 primetime games: the Vikings, the Raiders, the Commanders, the Broncos, and the Jags. 4 teams with 1 primetime game: Tennessee, Arizona, New England, and Indy, and 1 team with 0 primetime games. And I know that you could guess it. It is Bryce Young and the Carolina Panthers. Hey, listen, when you have the first overall pick in a draft and you actually don't make that pick, you don't deserve any primetime games. But I like what Carolina did to help out Bryce Young, even though I wasn't blown away by their draft. They have a lot of holes. I thought that they should have taken care of some other pieces. Like Jonathan Brooks is a nice player. He's my favorite running back in the second round. Probably not what they needed, but they surrounded Bryce Young with talent, and he has a better chance of having success in year 2. I like Dave Canales as a player. Jonathan Brooks can make things happen to the backfield. I think he's the closest back to, out of the running back class, the closest to be a bell cow 3-down back. Coming off an injury, it may take some time. He may be like that Cam Akers, Javonte Williams type rookie season where he explodes in the second half of the season. But Xavier Legette, Sanders tight end, they got another guy in Deontay Johnson through free agency. Guys that can separate, make some plays for Bryce Young, but 0 primetime games for Bryce Young. That's probably a good thing. Here's a look at the teams on bye. Of course, we're such a long way away from the season. And if you're a diehard football fan, or your team, you already know when they have the bye week. But week 5 is when the byes do begin. Philadelphia, the Chargers, the Lions, the Titans for week 5. Week 6, the Chiefs, the Rams, the Dolphins, the Vikings. I don't know about you guys, but I like to have my team have the bye week a little bit later on in the season. The Bears week 7 and the Cowboys week 7. No teams on bye week 8. Week 9 has San Fran and Pittsburgh. Week 10, Cleveland, Green Bay, the Raiders in Seattle. Week 11, Arizona, Carolina, Tampa, and the Giants. And then we get into what the Bimageddon is, what everybody calls it, the tough part of the schedule. You need wins to get into the fantasy football playoffs. You got to plan accordingly. Week 12, there are 6 teams on bye: Atlanta, Buffalo, Cincinnati, Jacksonville, New Orleans, and the New York Jets. Just taking a look at that, of course, there's going to be some good quarterbacks there, and Kirk Cousins and Rodgers is guys that are recovering from ruptured Achilles. We'll see what their form is like come week 12. But you also have Josh Allen and Trevor Lawrence and Joe Burrow there as quarterbacks to replace that week. Week 14, 6 more teams on bye. No teams on bye week 13, thank goodness. Week 14, you have Baltimore, Denver, Houston, Indianapolis, New England, and Washington. So you have some rushing quarterbacks there that will have a bye week. And Lamar Jackson and Anthony Richardson and Jaden Daniels. Who knows? I would say Drake May is the quarterback at least by week 14. I don't think he'll open up the season as the quarterback. I think Jacoby Brissett will open up as a quarterback. We know CJ Stroud will be the man there in Houston. He'll have to deal with somebody else that week. And Denver, I would imagine Bo Nix is the quarterback at that point. I think he will start the season with the Broncos, but it's a possibility that Sean Payton goes another way. There's still some Zach Wilson truthers out there, but I digress. Okay, so those are the bye weeks there, and let's get into the week 1 schedule. Never too early to look at the lines here on the way out. As we talked about, Kansas City opens up. The 2-time defending Super Bowl champion Chiefs open up as 3-point favorites here against Baltimore. Should be a fantastic way to start the season. A rematch of the AFC Conference Championship game. Then the very next night, that's right, Friday Night Football in Brazil. Green Bay gets a little bit of a layup here. Now, I'm saying layup because one of their road games is at a neutral game script. So they're one of the winners, I suppose, if you're looking at winners and losers of the NFL schedule. One of the road games in a neutral setting, but still a tough opponent. But the game will be in Brazil. That should be super fun. Friday Night Football in Brazil, Eagles and Packers. We get Pittsburgh and Atlanta. That will be Kirk Cousins' first game at home. Minus 2.5-point favorites against the Steelers. Don't know if it'll be Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. We'll see how that battle progresses in camp. I'd say it's Russ to start. We'll see some Fields this season for sure. Arizona at Buffalo. So the Bills are the second largest favorites here in week 1 at home, minus 7. The life without Stephon Diggs does begin. Keon Coleman, of course, of the Buffalo Bills, and Marvin Harrison Jr.'s first game will be in Buffalo against Bills Mafia. We have Caleb Williams' first game at home 4.5-point favorites, the Bears against Will Levis and the Tennessee Titans, a very new look Tennessee Titans. And I'm actually I'm excited about the Tennessee Titans. I think if you're a fan, you say goodbye to King Henry and you get new blood. And Brian Callahan's a hell of a play caller. I thought he did some great things last year with Jake Browning. And you got all kinds of just playmakers on the squad now. DeAndre Hopkins still has a little bit to offer. Calvin Ridley joins the squad. Tyler Boyd joins the squad, who's very familiar, of course, with Brian Callahan, who was in Cincinnati last season as the OC with Zach Taylor. And then you have some running backs that can catch the balls out of the backfield, and Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard. But the Bears are here at 4.5-point favorites. And we know that Caleb Williams is set up, man, real nice. It's not too often you see your number one quarterback, of course, like the number one overall pick, a quarterback set up this nicely. Of course, it was Carolina's pick, but Keenan Allen on the squad, DJ Moore, Romo Dunze, a bunch of backs that can catch out of the backfield, and the solid defense. As I alluded to earlier, these teams change. Like the Bears were a team you could run all over. They get Montez Sweat halfway through the season, and they have one of the best run stopping defenses in football in the second half. So even though we went over the easiest and hardest schedules, teams do change in the second half of the season. So you can only take that stuff, I think, with a grain of salt. But I like to look at it, and I know you guys do as well. And we will really dig deep into week 15 and 17 here in a few moments. The largest favorite of week 1, the Cincinnati Bengals at -8 as they welcome in the New England Patriots. I can already tell looking at this schedule that Cincy will probably be the chalkiest survivor pick to kick us off week 1. I don't really see an upset. New England's defense still good, but part of the reason why I believe Jacoby Brissett will be under center is because there's not a lot going on there in New England. I don't think you want to throw them into the fire like that right away. Houston, the only road favorite, -1.5, a division game in Indy against Anthony Richardson and CJ Stroud. That one should be a good one. Miami, 4-point favorites at home against Jacksonville. New Orleans, also 4-point favorites at home against Carolina. We have the Giants, 1-point favorites at home against Minnesota. This one kind of surprises me. Basically, a pick 'em could change the other way. And not a lot of people are going to be betting at this time of the season. And I don't encourage you guys to do either because so much can happen in injuries and whatnot. I wouldn't imagine this line moves much anyways, but I could see, whether it's JJ McCarthy or Sam Darnold, I could see Minnesota going into New York and winning that game. I'll be on the Vikings there. Denver and Seattle. So it could be Bo Nix's first game. He'll have to battle the 12th man if it is, -4.5 favorites there. Seattle at home. The Chargers, Jim Harbaugh getting it done here with the Chargers to open up the campaign at home against the Raiders, a division rival there, -3, the Chargers. Dallas at Cleveland, so a tough one for Dak Prescott and company to go on the road and play the Cleveland Browns, -1, the Browns favorite at home. Washington, Jaden Daniels' first game will be in Tampa against Baker Mayfield. The Bucs are 3.5-point favorites. We get a rematch of last year's phenomenal game between the Rams and the Lions. That's your Sunday night football tilt, -3, Detroit against the Rams. And then you have Monday Night Football, San Fran, 5.5 favorites against the New York Jets. So that will be primetime game number 1 for Aaron Rodgers. Just rolling through the rest of the schedule, I took a couple notes here. Just to share a couple things with you of like games that kind of pique my interest or some revenge games as we get out of here. And we'll take a look at some of the primetime stuff in week 15 to 17 here in just a moment. But week 2, as I mentioned earlier, Chicago and Houston, Sunday Night Football. So we'll get Caleb versus CJ Stroud. That one should be a good one. Mentioned Russ in Denver. Week 2, if he is the quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Week 3, we have Gabe Davis back in Buffalo to take on the Bills. His Jags in Buffalo. Week 4, Minnesota at Green Bay. So we get the return of Aaron Jones to Lambeau. Week 5, Stephon Diggs faces his old team in Buffalo, but he's at home in Houston. Week 7 should be a fun one for Saquon Barkley, his return to the Giants as a member of the Philadelphia Eagles. Week 8, we have Chicago at Washington, so it's the battle between the top 2 picks in Williams and Daniels. Week 12 is the Harbaugh Bowl, and also Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins against Baltimore. Week 13, Thanksgiving, the 3 Thanksgiving games, Chicago at Detroit. Of course, we always know the Lions are going to play at home. We have the Giants at Dallas, and then Miami at Green Bay. So some pretty appealing matchups. I think the Bears are going to be a fun team to watch this season. The Giants are not going to be a fun team to watch this season. The Cowboys should steamroll them. Week 14, we get Kirk Cousins in Minnesota to take on the Vikings. Will it be Kirk? Will it be Michael Penix Jr.? I think if Kirk is healthy, it will be Kirk Cousins. Week 15. This is the start of playoffs, right? I just circled some games that could be fantasy friendly, like Cincy at Tennessee. You get the Callahan thing there against his old squad. Baltimore's got a great matchup against the Giants. Dallas has a great matchup against Carolina. Atlanta's on the road, but in a dome against the Raiders. Chicago on the road in a dome against Minnesota. Buffalo on the road against Detroit. So some fun, high-scoring games, I think, in Week 15 for those matchups there as well. Week 16, get the Saturday games here. So you get Houston at KC, and then you have Pittsburgh at Baltimore. And then those four teams will turn around and play on Wednesday. So they play on Saturday, and then they all play on Wednesday, which is Christmas Day. This is match the opponents. KC will play Pittsburgh, and then Baltimore will play Houston. So they all get a home game here. Houston at KC, Pittsburgh at Baltimore the Saturday, then the Christmas Day football on a Wednesday, KC at Pittsburgh, Baltimore at Houston. Again, just tough stuff for all four of those teams and really for Pittsburgh and the way the schedule finishes off for them as well. Week 17, Atlanta at Washington, Carolina at Tampa. It could be some fun fantasy-friendly games there. And then you get the Saints at home against the Raiders, a little revenge game there for Derek Carr. As for the primetime stuff, we can roll through this pretty quickly. Why not? Again, everything NFL schedule related here. Is your team playing on Monday Night Football? Well, if you're a Panthers fan, you know that they're not. So we open up Jets at Niners, then Falcons at Philadelphia. And this will be like the third year in a row, I think, the Eagles open up against Kirk Cousins at home. I'm pretty sure it is. Of course, the Vikings the past couple of seasons. I just remember Kirk having a rough time in Philly at the Link and Darius Slay, and he'll have to do it again September 16th. We have two Monday Night Football games in Week 3. We have Jacksonville at Buffalo and Washington at Cincinnati. We have two Week 4. We have Tennessee at Miami and Seattle at Detroit. Then we get into Week 5, New Orleans at Kansas City. Then Buffalo at New York, the Jets. That's October 14th. Then two more games here. That would be Week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Week 7, there are two more Monday Night Football games. Baltimore at Tampa. The Chargers at the Cardinals. I kind of like the two Monday Night Football games. I get behind that as long as they're not at the same time. And then the Giants at the Steelers. We have the Bucks at KC November 4th. This one should be fun. Miami and the Rams in LA. We have an all Texas battle here November 18th. Houston at Dallas. Then the Harbaugh Bowl, as I alluded to earlier, November 25th. Baltimore at the Chargers. We have Cleveland at Denver. Could be a little bit of a snooze fest there. December 9th, we have Cincinnati at Dallas. And then we have two games on Monday Night Football, December 16th, Chicago at Minnesota, and then Atlanta at Las Vegas. December 23rd, Christmas Eve, New Orleans at Green Bay. December 30th, Detroit at San Fran. Of course, the final week of the season, the Monday Night Football game will not happen. Of course, we'll have some Sunday Night Football there as well. There's Thursday Night Football games are not as like, usually they're just like kind of stinkers. There's a couple matchups here that I really like off the hop, Buffalo and Miami. Week 2, of course, the Thursday Night Football game, KC and Baltimore, to get us underway. But that one should be a fun one. Baltimore or Buffalo at Miami. Week 3 is not so much. New England at the Jets. Week 4, not so much. Dallas at the Giants. Week 5 could be fun. Tampa at Atlanta, divisional matchup there. Week 6, the Niners at Seattle. Week 7, maybe a snooze fest between the Broncos and the Saints. Week 8, fun. Minnesota at the Rams. Week 9, the Texans at the Jets. Should be fun. Stroud and Rodgers. Week 10, divisional matchup between the Bengals and the Ravens. Week 11, divisional matchup between the Commanders and the Eagles. Week 12, Steelers and Browns. Going to take the under. Week 13, Black Friday football. Again, it will be the Raiders and the Chiefs. And then we have a Week 14, Green Bay at Detroit. Good one. Let's go. The Rams at the Niners, Week 15. The Browns at the Bengals, Week 16. And then the Seahawks at the Chicago Bears, Week 17 on December 26th. That would be a Boxing Day there for you. And then the Sunday Night Football schedule. Why not? Because we're rolling through all the primetime games here. Appreciate you guys hanging out. Smash the like button. Why not? Rams at Lions. Love this matchup. Week 1 Sunday Night Football, then the Bears and the Texans. We talked about that a couple times. Stroud and Williams. Week 3, Chiefs at Atlanta. Buffalo at Baltimore for week 4. Week 5 has us watching Dallas at Pittsburgh. Week 6, the first stinker, Bengals at Giants. Week 7, Jets at Steelers. Week 8, Cowboys at Niners. So I'll be tuned in live for that one. Week 9, Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence back in Philadelphia. They played there last year. Week 9 at the Link. Detroit again, another Sunday Night Football game here against the Texans, their second Sunday Night Football game. The Colts at the Jets, week 11. Week 12 has us watching the Eagles at the Rams. So the second there for Philadelphia. San Francisco, the second Sunday Night Football game against Buffalo. That one should be really good. Week 13 in Buffalo. Week 14, Chargers at Chiefs. Week 15, Packers at Seahawks. Week 16, Bucks at Cowboys. And then week 17, part of the gauntlet there for Miami to wrap up the season. Week 17, Miami at Cleveland. And I don't believe there'll be any Sunday Night Football or Thursday Night Football on that final week of the season. So for the hardcores that have hung out this long, 35 minutes in, I got everything time stamped for you guys anyways, but you've been hanging on this long here with us. We're taking an early look at week 15 to week 17. This is a lot to take in. We'll just roll through this together. We'll start here in the NFC. There's not a lot of takeaways I have when I look at this. And again, the team is on the left if you're watching here on our YouTube page. And then it's the matchups through the playoffs, week 15, 16, and 17. So Arizona home to New England, at Carolina, at the Rams. Not awful. You know, if you're a Kyler owner and we'll see what happens with the backfield. James Conner hasn't really been able to put together too many full seasons. Trey Benson there, but Hopkins, you're looking at New England, tough matchup, but not too bad, even though those games are on the road with Carolina and then the Rams. Atlanta at the Raiders, home to the Giants, and then at Washington. So pretty good there for the Atlanta Falcons and Kirk Cousins and company. Carolina, you're not going to have too many, weapons here from the Panthers from a fantasy football perspective, but at home against Dallas and then Arizona, then on the road against Tampa. Chicago at Meaney, home to Detroit, and then home to Seattle. It's not too bad there for Caleb Williams and all those weapons there in the dome. Then against Detroit, the secondary was bad last year. I think they did some things to improve it this year, but I think, plus matchup, I believe, for a quarterback in the secondary there. Still going to be a tough team to run on. Dallas at Carolina, home to Tampa at Philly. Despite the game at Philly, it's not too bad for Dak Prescott and company. CeeDee Lamb's going to eat. And no matter who the opponent is, we know that. Detroit, home to Buffalo, at Chicago, at San Fran. So pretty tough 3 games there. Certainly 2 of the 3 are tough for Jared Goff, who we know got paid, but also has some pretty significant home and away splits. So something to keep an eye on for Jared Goff for you super flex best ball owners out there. Green Bay at Seattle, home to the Saints, and then at Minnesota. The Rams are at San Fran, at the Jets, and then home to Arizona. So 2 tough matchups to start fantasy football playoffs, at San Fran and then at the Jets. Minnesota's home to Chicago, then at Seattle, home to Green Bay. The Giants, tough start to the playoffs, at home to Baltimore, at Atlanta, and then home to Indy. Really the only guy that I'm going to have is Malik Neighbors on the Giants. I mean, I don't think I'm interested in really anybody on the Giants squad. New Orleans at home to Washington, at Green Bay, then home to the Raiders. Philly has Pittsburgh at home, then at Washington, home to Dallas. San Fran, home to the Rams, at Miami, home to Detroit. Seattle, home to the Packers, home to the Vikings, then at Chicago. Tampa is in LA to take on the Chargers, also in Dallas next week. And then they have a good matchup against Carolina to wrap up the fantasy football playoffs. Then Washington, Jaden Daniels, who I really do like as a best ball quarterback, and a quarterback that I've been drafting is like a top 12 guy. He's going around quarterback 14 in best ball, but I have seen him go a little bit earlier in the couple of drafts that I've been in. He'll be in New Orleans week 15, then home to Philly, then home to Atlanta. Over to the AFC, Baltimore, pretty good start to the playoffs, at the Giants, then home to Pittsburgh, and then at Houston. Gets a little bit tougher for them. Buffalo at Detroit, home to New England, home to the Jets. Not super easy for Josh Allen and company. Cincinnati at Tennessee, home to Cleveland, home to Denver. Cleveland is home to KC, at Cincy, home to Miami. Denver, home to Indy, at the Colts, at the Bengals. The Texans, tough 3 games here. Home to Miami, at KC, then home to Baltimore. We're going to find out how legit These Texans really are. Indy's in Denver, home to the Titans, then at the Jets. So pretty solid there for Anthony Richardson and company. I think AD Mitchell's going to take a little bit of time, and I don't really love the landing spot. I think it was great for the Colts and Shane Steichen. I think he could play kind of the AJ Brown role. I don't expect him to be AJ, but you're also dealing with a team that's going to run a lot, inexperienced play at quarterback. Richardson's still pretty raw, but AD Mitchell should see a lot of one-on-one with Pittman. Everybody's in a good spot. Downs in the slot. Pittman is your intermediate guy, can catch almost anything thrown his way. And then AD Mitchell you could see a lot of one-on-one, and Richardson can throw it up to him. There's some good matchups there in Denver, Tennessee, and the Giants. Maybe he comes on strong in the second half there. Jacksonville's at home to the Jets. In Las Vegas, take on the Raiders. At home to the Titans. KC at Cleveland. Home to Houston. At Pittsburgh. The Raiders are home to Atlanta. Home to Jacksonville. And then at New Orleans. Doesn't seem too bad. The Chargers at home to Tampa. At home to the Broncos in New England. Miami at Houston. Home to San Fran. At Cleveland. The Patriots are on the road for the first two games throughout the playoffs at Arizona and Buffalo. And then they're home to the Chargers. The Jets at the Jags, home to the Rams, and then at Buffalo. Then Pittsburgh, at Philly, at Baltimore, home to KC. And Tennessee, I don't mind this one. I think the Titans are going to be a sneaky, decent offense, like middle of the pack. Okay, can we give them middle of the pack, upside to have like big weeks maybe? I don't know. Tennessee at home to Cincy, at Indy, and then at Jacksonville. So a lot there that I threw at you guys, but I know a lot of people are drafting at this time of the season. They want to look at weeks 15, 16, and 17. Just rolled through the easiest and hardest schedules to start the season, to finish the season. Looked at some of the primetime games, some fun revenge games, and week one. Never too early, right, to look at week one. I thought this was going to be a short show. It was not. You guys hung out with me the whole time. Appreciate it. At Chris Meaney. Like, review, rate, review, subscribe. Any comments, any questions, hit me up. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about some of the big winners and losers through the NFL offseason, how your dynasty draft should go. We already did a rookie wide receiver video here on our YouTube page. And Mean Streets, of course, on iTunes. But I will anyways. There was a SiriusXM post-draft that I took part in. I wanted to show you guys that next week. So we'll take a look at that draft, where the early value is, more best ball drafts. Talk about some top stacks, some late round targets early. Remember, as a show, we were on CJ Stroud and Puka Nacua. They were our most owned quarterback and wide receiver in our best ball streams last year. So hopefully we can nail a couple late round picks now, get ahead of it. Of course, I didn't think Puka was going to be that good. Nobody thought Puka was that good. Everyone's going to look who the next Puka is. I think it's going to be an outlier, but we'll try to identify some players that are going late that could rise up draft boards, especially once they start to hit the field. And that buzz is always going to happen, and players are going to rise up draft boards. We'll try to get ahead of it early here. So appreciate you guys taking the time to hang out, and we'll be back next week to talk a whole lot more about the NFL. If you're betting, good luck on the ice, on the hard court. We'll talk to you soon. Cheers.